Chapter 1. The grand estate was alive with music, the sounds of violins and laughter spilling through the open ballroom doors. Glittering chandeliers hung from the ceilings, illuminating the nobles who twirled across the floor in silks and jewels. But Eleanor Sinclair was not inside. She lingered in the shadows of the vast garden, hidden beneath the archways of ivy and blooming roses. The crisp night air wrapped around her, cool against her skin as she stood beneath the silver glow of the moon. She was waiting. Her heart pounded against her ribs, her hands tightening around the edges of her veil. She had never dared something like this before, had never risked stepping beyond the carefully constructed walls her stepmother had built around her. But tonight, she had no choice. The Duke of Collinwood was here, and he was the only man who could save her. She had overheard the whispers, the plan set in motion by her stepmother and stepsister. Hazel, her beautiful, arrogant stepsister, had been chosen to seduce the Duke, to lure him into marriage and secure their family's wealth. Eleanor, as always, was to remain hidden, but she would not stand by and let that happen. She had no illusions about love, no romantic fantasies of passion and stolen kisses, but she understood power. And she knew that the Duke was the most powerful man in the kingdom. If he agreed to her proposal, he would be her escape, and she would be his shield. No emotions, no expectations, only a marriage of convenience. A sharp gust of wind rustled through the hedges, carrying the faint scent of cigar smoke. Eleanor straightened, her breath catching as she turned toward the sound of approaching footsteps. And then he appeared. Alexander Collinwood, the infamous Duke of Collinwood. Tall, imposing. His broad shoulders cast long shadows beneath the moonlight. His dark hair was slightly tousled, a sharp contrast to the cold precision in his piercing gaze. A man not to be crossed. He stepped away from the ballroom doors, the glow of the chandeliers fading behind him. He was dressed in a fine black coat, the golden embroidery marking his status. In one hand he held a lit cigar, the ember glowing faintly in the night. Eleanor forced herself to move. She stepped out of the shadows, her veil fluttering slightly with the wind. The soft rustle of fabric caught his attention, and his sharp gaze immediately locked onto her. For a long moment, he simply stared. She saw the flicker of curiosity in his expression. Then something colder, a sharp, assessing gaze, one that stripped away pretense and left only truth. She swallowed, steadying herself. "You were waiting for me." His voice was deep, smooth, unreadable. "Yes," she answered quietly. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly, though his amusement did not reach his eyes. "Bold, aren't you?" She took a breath. "I had no choice." He exhaled a slow stream of smoke, watching her carefully. "Everyone has a choice." "Not women like me," she murmured. His gaze narrowed. "Tell me," he said, taking a slow step forward, "what does a veiled woman want with me?" She forced herself to meet his gaze through the thin fabric covering her face. "A deal," she said. His brows lifted slightly. "A deal?" She nodded. "I know your family is pressuring you to marry." His lips curled slightly, though not in a smile. "Do you?" "I know they expect you to choose a proper noblewoman," she continued, "one who will carry herself with grace and duty." Something flickered in his gaze, a sharp, dangerous glint. She had struck a nerve. "You have no interest in love," she continued. "You have no desire to be controlled by a woman, nor to play the role of doting husband. You need a wife who will keep the peace but expect nothing of you." She took a step closer, tilting her chin slightly. "I can be that wife." The silence between them stretched. Then he laughed, a low, dark sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "You expect me to marry a woman I cannot even see?" he asked, amusement laced in his tone. She clenched her hands at her sides. "You don't need to see me. You need someone who won't demand your heart. I need a husband who will keep me safe from them." She did not have to explain who them was. Her stepmother. Hazel. The vultures who circled her, waiting to pick her apart. The Duke studied her carefully, his expression shifting into something unreadable. "You assume much about me," he murmured. "You assume much about me as well," she countered, a flicker of something, intrigue. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen. He exhaled, tilting his head slightly. "And what if I refuse?" "Then you will marry someone who expects your love," she said quietly, "who will demand your attention, who will bring you misery." A beat of silence. Then he smirked, a slow, dangerous smirk. "You are quite the little schemer," he murmured. She didn't deny it, she only lifted her chin slightly. Do we have a deal? A long, tense moment passed. Then, I will consider it, he said. She exhaled, relief flickering through her chest. 3 nights from now, she whispered, at the abandoned chapel on the edge of the city. If you accept, meet me there. His gaze darkened slightly. Very well, he murmured. A promise, a chance. She turned to leave. But then, a voice shattered the night. Eleanor? Hazel. Panic shot through her. She could not be seen. Not now. Not like this. Before the Duke could stop her, she turned, lifting the edges of her skirts, and ran. She did not stop until she had disappeared into the darkness. She did not stop until she was home. She did not stop until she realized her fate was already sealed, because she knew Alexander Collinwood would come for her. And when he did, there would be no turning back. He watched her disappear, his cigar burning to ash between his fingers. She was fascinating. No fear, no trembling, only absolute determination. She thought she was using him, that this was her game to play. How adorable. His lips curled slightly, amusement flickering through him. If she had asked for riches, he might have refused. If she had demanded his time, he would have walked away. But she had asked for nothing but his name, and in return, she had offered exactly what he needed, a marriage with no love, no demands, no expectations. Or so she thought. He smirked, exhaling a slow breath. 3 nights from now, she had said. Chapter 2. The cold iron dug into Eleanor's wrists, the heavy chains pulling at her delicate skin as she was shoved forward, the force nearly sending her to her knees. She barely caught herself before she stumbled, her breath quickening at the sound of the massive wooden doors creaking open. The scent of cigar smoke, sweat, and damp wood filled the air, thick with the tension of a crowded room. The sound of low murmurs, drunken laughter, and the occasional clinking of coins echoed through the vast underground chamber. She knew where she was. She had heard the rumors. This was no ordinary auction house. This was a place where men with too much money and too little conscience gathered to purchase things that were never meant to be sold. And tonight, she was the prize. Her stomach churned, nausea rising in her throat as she was led through the darkened corridor, the shadows stretching long against the flickering torchlight. Her stepmother walked a few paces behind her, the familiar clicking of her jeweled heels ringing sharply against the stone. "Do behave yourself, Eleanor," Lady Beatrice murmured, her voice cold and composed. "A nobleman will surely find you useful." Eleanor said nothing. She knew better than to waste her breath. Lady Beatrice had made her intentions clear. She had known about Eleanor's secret meeting with the Duke, had punished her for it, and now she was disposing of her before Alexander Collinwood could intervene. They reached the edge of the platform where the auctioneer, a tall, heavy-set man with a deep voice and greedy eyes, stood waiting. He barely spared her a glance before turning his attention to Lady Beatrice. "Is this the girl?" "Yes," her stepmother answered smoothly, pulling a rolled parchment from her sleeve. "You'll find everything in order. She is unwed, untouched, and of noble blood. A rarity, wouldn't you say?" Eleanor swallowed back the bile rising in her throat. The auctioneer unrolled the parchment, scanning its contents before nodding. "A fine offering indeed," he mused. "The veil is a nice touch, adds mystery. The men will pay more for what they cannot see." Lady Beatrice smiled, her lips curving into something sharp. "Make sure she fetches a high price." With that, she turned, disappearing into the shadows of the crowd without so much as a backward glance. Eleanor's pulse pounded in her ears. She was alone now, alone and completely at their mercy. The auctioneer gestured toward the guards. "Bring her up." Before she could protest, the chains around her wrists were yanked forward, and she was hauled onto the raised platform. The heat from the torches cast a golden glow across the chamber, illuminating the sea of waiting men. Lords, barons, merchants, each dressed in fine attire, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. A sharp chill raced down her spine. She clenched her hands into fists beneath the folds of her gown. She would not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction. The auctioneer stepped forward, spreading his arms wide as he addressed the room. "Gentlemen," he called, his voice carrying through the air, "tonight we present something truly rare. A noblewoman, veiled to preserve her modesty, untouched by any man's hand. An offering of the highest quality." A ripple of interest swept through the crowd. Coins were already clinking against wooden tables, murmured discussions taking place between eager bidders. The auctioneer's lips curled. "Shall we begin?" Eleanor's breath caught. This was happening. Her fate was about to be sealed in the highest bid. She tried to steady herself, to force her trembling legs to hold firm. But then, a single voice rang out. "Stop." The room went silent. The auctioneer froze mid-sentence, his eyes widening slightly as all heads turned toward the back of the hall. Eleanor's pulse skipped. She knew that voice. The sound of boots striking stone echoed through the chamber, steady, unhurried. A presence so powerful, so absolute that the very air shifted around him. A figure emerged from the shadows, his black coat flowing behind him, his golden cufflinks gleaming under the torchlight. His sharp, chiseled features remained unreadable, his eyes dark and cutting. Alexander Collinwood, the Duke of Collinwood, a nobleman no one dared to cross. A man who had not come to bid. He had come to take. The auctioneer swallowed thickly. "My Lord Duke, we were just about to begin the bidding." "There will be no bidding," Alexander said, his voice low and precise. Murmurs rippled through the room, hushed whispers of uncertainty. The auctioneer hesitated, his gaze flickering toward Eleanor before returning to the Duke. "With all due respect, my lord, this is an established—" "How much?" The auctioneer faltered. Alexander's fingers rested against the hilt of his sword. "Name your price." A tense silence followed. Then, 100 gold pieces, the auctioneer said, his voice a touch nervous. Alexander reached into his coat, pulling out a heavy velvet pouch. He tossed it onto the table without another word. The room remained deathly quiet. The auctioneer hesitated, glancing toward the other nobleman, as if seeking permission. But no one spoke. No one challenged him. No one dared. Finally, the auctioneer nodded, motioning toward the guards. "Release her." The chains around Eleanor's wrists fell away, clattering to the ground. For a brief moment, she stood frozen. Then, warm fingers curled around her wrist. Not rough, not forceful, but firm, unyielding. Alexander did not look at her. He simply turned, guiding her from the stage as if she had never belonged there in the first place, and no one, not even her stepmother, watching from the crowd, dared to stop him. The cold night air hit her the moment they stepped beyond the threshold. Eleanor barely had a chance to catch her breath before Alexander came to a stop. His fingers released her wrist, only to tilt her chin upward, forcing her gaze to meet his. His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes were sharper than before. She swallowed. "You came for me," she whispered. A muscle in his jaw tensed. "You asked for 3 days," he murmured. "I came in 2. She exhaled softly. "Relief, not fear, never fear." He stepped back slightly, his sharp gaze trailing over her, as if assessing for injuries. "Did they hurt you?" She hesitated, then shook her head. Something in his gaze shifted. Something dangerous. She knew then, if she had said yes, someone would be dead before sunrise. Without another word, he turned, motioning toward the waiting carriage. "Come," he said. She did not hesitate. She did not look back. She simply followed. And as the carriage doors closed behind them, sealing her fate, Eleanor realized something. She was no longer a prisoner. She was a wife. And soon, she would be the Duchess of Collinwood. Civilized men did not claim what they wanted with blood-stained hands. Alexander Collinwood was not a civilized man, and she was about to become his wife. The priest cleared his throat again. "Do you, Alexander Collinwood, Duke of Collinwood, take this woman as your lawfully wedded wife, to cherish, honor, and protect for all the days of your life?" Alexander's voice was like steel wrapped in silk. "I do." The priest turned to her. "And do you, Eleanor Sinclair, take this man as your lawfully wedded husband? To honor, stand beside, and—" "I do," she said before he could finish. Alexander's head tilted slightly, his sharp eyes flickering toward her. She had answered quickly, without hesitation, without fear. The priest blinked, startled. But Eleanor knew what she was doing. She had already made her choice the moment she walked into that garden 3 nights ago, and there was no turning back now. The priest nodded slowly, collecting himself. "The rings, there are none," Alexander said smoothly. Eleanor barely had time to process that before she felt his fingers reach into his coat. A moment later, something rough brushed against her skin. She looked down, a simple string, frayed, uneven, unworthy of nobility. But Alexander lifted her hand, tying the string around her finger with careful, deliberate movements. His voice was low as he murmured, "You will have a proper ring tomorrow." Eleanor swallowed. She did not know why, but her chest tightened at his words. The priest looked faintly horrified but managed to compose himself. Then, by the laws of the kingdom and the eyes of the divine, I pronounce you husband and wife. May this union be— Alexander was already turning, already guiding Eleanor toward the door, his hand warm against the small of her back. There was no celebration, no applause, only the quiet sound of Eleanor's heartbeat in her ears. The moment they stepped out into the cold night air, she exhaled. She was married, to the Duke, to Alexander, and she did not regret it, not once. The carriage ride back to his estate was silent. Alexander did not speak. He simply sat across from her, his gloved hands resting on his thighs, his sharp gaze watching her every move. She could still feel the rough string around her finger. It was not the ring of a duchess, but it was a promise, a vow, one that he had already sealed in blood. The estate loomed in the distance, its tall iron gates opening as they arrived. The moment the carriage stopped, Alexander stepped out first, his movements fluid and controlled. Eleanor did not wait for him to offer his hand. She stepped out on her own. A flicker of amusement crossed his features. He liked that. The butler was waiting at the entrance, his expression calm as he took in the sight of Eleanor standing beside the Duke. "My lord," Alexander barely glanced at him. "She sleeps in my room." Eleanor stilled. The butler did not react. "As you wish." Alexander led her inside, his strides long and confident. He moved through the corridors as if he had already decided everything for her. But she did not protest. She simply followed. The bedroom was large, the massive bed covered in dark silks. A fire flickered in the hearth, casting shadows along the walls. Alexander stepped inside first. Then he turned to her. She held his gaze. He reached up, fingers brushing against the edge of her veil. For a brief moment he hesitated. Then he stepped back. "You will sleep here," he said, his voice low. "I will take the guest room tonight." Eleanor blinked. She had expected. She wasn't sure what she had expected, but not that. He moved toward the door, pausing just before he left. "Tomorrow," he murmured, "you will wake as the Duchess of Collinwood." Then, without another word, he was gone, and Eleanor was left standing in her husband's room, in her new life. Chapter 4. Eleanor woke to the scent of sandalwood and smoke lingering in the air, the warmth of the fire casting soft shadows against the dark silken sheets. For a moment she didn't move. The events of the previous night settled over her slowly. The auction, Alexander's arrival, the wedding in the cathedral, and the moment he had left her in his bedroom. She was now the Duchess of Collinwood. The thought should have frightened her. It should have left her uneasy. But it didn't. Instead, as she lay beneath the heavy blankets, she felt something unexpectedly steady settle in her chest. Not fear, not hesitation, certainty. The Duke had made his intentions clear from the moment he had entered that auction house. She belonged to him. And strangely, she had no desire to fight it. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Before she could respond, the door opened. And there he was. Alexander stood in the doorway, still dressed in the dark attire from last night, though his coat was now absent, his sleeves rolled up slightly. His sharp gaze landed on her immediately, scanning her as if assessing whether she had slept well, whether she had eaten, whether she was unharmed. His expression gave nothing away. But there was something about the way he looked at her, as if he had already committed every detail of her to memory. "Good," he murmured, stepping inside. "You're awake." She swallowed. "Ah, yes." He said nothing as he moved toward the table near the fireplace. A tray had been set there, filled with freshly baked bread, fruit, eggs, and tea. Eleanor hesitated as she sat up, the heavy blankets slipping from her shoulders. "I had the kitchen prepare breakfast," Alexander said as he picked up a plate. "You will eat all of it." She blinked. Had he just given her an order about food? He must have noticed her hesitation because his sharp gaze flicked toward her. "Did they not feed you properly before?" Eleanor froze. The way he said it, calm but dangerously quiet, made something in her chest tighten. She could lie. She could tell him that her stepmother had provided for her, that she had never gone hungry, but something about the way he looked at her made her feel as though he already knew the truth. Slowly, she shook her head. Alexander's fingers tightened around the porcelain plate. Then, without a word, he walked over to her. Before she could react, he sat on the edge of the bed and lifted a piece of bread toward her. Eleanor stared at him. "Eat," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. She hesitated for only a second before accepting the bite. The warmth of the bread melted on her tongue, and she hadn't realized how hungry she was until now. Alexander watched her carefully as she chewed, his expression unreadable. But when she reached for the plate to take the food herself, he didn't let go. "I will feed you," he said. Eleanor's breath caught. There was no mockery in his voice, no amusement, only pure, unwavering determination. Slowly, she took another bite. And Alexander, for the first time since she had met him, looked satisfied. After breakfast, Alexander led her through the halls of his estate. Eleanor had never seen a home so grand yet so cold. The ceilings stretched high, the walls adorned with intricate tapestries, the chandeliers casting golden light along the polished floors. Yet, despite its beauty, there was an emptiness to it, a loneliness that clung to the air. "This estate is yours now," Alexander said as they walked. Eleanor glanced at him. "Yours, you mean?" His gaze flicked toward her, sharp and assessing. "No, I mean yours." Her breath stilled. He spoke as if it were an absolute truth, as if nothing could change it. Before she could respond, they reached the grand staircase. At the bottom, a man stood waiting. An older gentleman, his posture straight despite the years etched into his features. His eyes, though aged, held a quiet intelligence and warmth that Eleanor had not expected. He inclined his head. "My Lord Duke." Alexander nodded once. "Edward." Eleanor blinked. He had used his first name. A duke addressing a butler without title was unheard of. "Your Grace," Edward said, turning to Eleanor, his voice gentle. "Welcome to Collinwood Manor. It is an honor to serve you." For a moment she did not know what to say. Alexander must have sensed her hesitation because his fingers brushed against her wrist in the lightest touch, a silent reassurance. She gripped his sleeve slightly, grounding herself. "Thank you," she finally said. Edward smiled faintly, his gaze filled with understanding, and for the first time since stepping into this house, she felt a little less alone. Over the next few days, Eleanor began to notice things. Small things. Things that no one else would have noticed. Whenever they dined together, Alexander never allowed the servants to assume what she wanted. He would ask which tea she preferred, and the very next day, it would be the only one served to her. When she mentioned in passing that she liked honey with her bread, there was always a small jar waiting at the table. If she took only half a serving, he would add more to her plate himself. "You need to eat more," he would murmur, his voice low but insistent. She would have argued, but the way he looked at her, as if he were committing every bite to memory, left no room for refusal. It was not forceful. It was not demanding. It was care, and it was unlike anything she had ever known. The first night, he had left her alone. The second night, he had done the same. But on the third night, everything changed. Eleanor had been unable to sleep, the unfamiliarity of her new surroundings pressing against her. She had shifted restlessly beneath the silk sheets, her body unable to relax. And then the door opened. She turned her head just in time to see Alexander enter. He said nothing. He simply removed his coat, placed his gloves on the side table, and walked toward the bed. Her breath caught. "You should rest," he murmured as he sat on the edge of the mattress. She swallowed, But before she could finish, he leaned back, reaching for her hand. The touch was gentle, almost cautious. He guided her against his chest, wrapping an arm around her waist. Not as a command, not as a demand, but as a silent declaration. "This is where you belong." She stiffened slightly at first, not from fear, but from the sheer unfamiliarity of it. The way his warmth seeped into her, his steady breath against her hair. She exhaled slowly, her body finally relaxing. Alexander said nothing. He only held her, and before she realized it, she had fallen asleep. As she breathed softly against him, Alexander lay awake, staring at the flickering candlelight. He had not expected her to fit against him so perfectly, had not expected the way her warmth settled against his chest, easing something sharp inside him. She did not fight him. She did not resist. She simply let him hold her, and for a man who'd never known softness, that was more dangerous than anything. Chapter 5. Eleanor stirred, warmth surrounding her, as she woke in the Duke's grand bed. The fire had long since dimmed, but his presence still lingered on the sheets, in the air, and deep within her thoughts. She turned slightly, blinking against the morning light. Alexander was gone, but she wasn't alone. A heavy fur-lined cloak had been draped over her, the faint scent of cedarwood and smoke clinging to the fabric. A silent gesture of care. She sat up slowly, fingers brushing over the delicate string still tied around her finger. She needed a proper ring. As if summoned by her thoughts, the door creaked open. Eleanor looked up just in time to see him. Alexander strode inside, his black coat unbuttoned, the crisp white shirt beneath slightly loosened at the collar. His dark hair was slightly tousled from the morning breeze, his sharp gaze immediately finding hers. "You're awake," he murmured, shutting the door behind him. She nodded. Yes." He studied her for a moment before stepping forward. "Get dressed." She hesitated. "For what?" His lips curled slightly at the edges. Not quite a smile, but something close. "You need a ring," he said simply. "And I have other things to buy you." The streets of the city were alive with morning bustle, merchants setting up their stalls as the scent of freshly baked bread and roasted chestnuts filled the air. Eleanor sat beside Alexander in the carriage, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She could feel the weight of his gaze. "Are you nervous?" he asked. She shook her head. "No," he exhaled softly. "Good." When they arrived, a man with round spectacles and a waistcoat rushed forward. "My Lord Duke," the jeweler bowed hastily, nearly tripping over himself. "To what do I owe the honor?" Alexander didn't answer. He simply lifted Eleanor's hand and pulled the frayed string from her finger. She sucked in a breath. The intimacy of the motion caught her off guard. The way his fingers lingered, the way his thumb brushed over her bare skin before releasing her hand. The jeweler gawked. "My Lord Duke, is this?" "My wife," Alexander cut in. "She needs a ring. Show us your best." The jeweler scrambled, unlocking the glass cases with shaking hands. Inside, rows of glittering rings sat beneath candlelight. Diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and sapphires. Eleanor hesitated. She had never owned anything this beautiful. "Choose one," Alexander murmured. She swallowed. I don't know which to pick." Without hesitation, he reached forward, his fingers brushing over the collection before stopping on a single piece. A thin gold band with a deep sapphire. He lifted it, turning to her. "This one," he said. She frowned slightly. "Why?" He glanced at the ring before returning his gaze to hers. "Because sapphires remind me of you." Her breath caught. The jeweler stood frozen, watching the exchange as if witnessing something far more intimate than a simple transaction. Eleanor swallowed. She had no words, so she simply lifted her hand. Alexander slid the ring onto her finger with slow, deliberate precision. A perfect fit. "Good," he murmured, his voice satisfied. The jeweler cleared his throat, visibly shaken. "A fine choice, my Lord Duke." Alexander ignored him. His eyes were still on Eleanor, on the ring, on the silent promise it carried. He tossed a pouch of gold onto the counter. "Send the rest of your finest pieces to the manor." The jeweler nearly collapsed. Eleanor blinked. "The rest?" Alexander turned smoothly toward her. "You'll need more jewelry," he said simply. Her lips parted, but before she could argue, he took her hand again and led her from the shop. The shopping trip didn't end with the ring. As they walked through the marketplace, Alexander bought her everything. A velvet cloak? Purchased. A silk gown embroidered with golden threads? Paid for without hesitation. A set of hairpins? Added to the growing collection. It didn't matter if she barely glanced at something. He noticed, and he bought it. At one point she sighed softly. "You don't have to buy everything." He barely looked at her. "I do," he said simply. She frowned. "Why?" His gaze flicked toward her, dark and unwavering. "Because you are mine." A slow warmth curled through her chest. She had no response, because she knew he wouldn't change his mind. By the time they returned to the estate, the sun was already beginning to set. Eleanor sat beside Alexander in the carriage, her body warm from the weight of his coat draped over her shoulders. The air between them was quiet, steady, until he spoke. "Are you tired?" She hesitated. "A little." Alexander exhaled. "Then rest." She frowned. "I don't." Before she could finish, he pulled her against him. Eleanor froze. His arms wrapped around her waist, steady, unrelenting. The warmth of him seeped into her. She could feel his heartbeat against her cheek. It was slow, certain. She hesitated for only a second before allowing herself to relax. She had never been held like this, never felt the kind of security he gave her. And before she even realized it, her eyes fluttered closed. Alexander didn't move as Eleanor drifted into sleep against him. He kept one arm around her, the other resting against his thigh as the carriage continued down the road. His fingers tapped against the sapphire ring on her hand. A strange, foreign satisfaction settled in his chest. He had given her a name, a title, a home, and now he had given her a ring, something that marked her as his, something that would never be removed. His grip around her waist tightened slightly. She had fallen asleep against him without fear, without hesitation. That, more than anything, was dangerous. She trusted him. Chapter 6. Eleanor awoke to the weight of something warm and firm against her, the steady rise and fall of a chest, a heartbeat beneath her ear. Her breath hitched slightly as her mind cleared from sleep, the reality of where she was and who she was with settling over her. She was lying on top of Alexander, not beside him, not at a distance, but fully pressed against him, his arm still wrapped protectively around her waist. Heat spread through her, a slow, creeping warmth that curled at the base of her spine. She had never been held like this, never been allowed to be close to someone. She tilted her head slightly, her cheek brushing against the fabric of his shirt. That was when she realized. He was awake. His breathing was deep and measured, but his fingers had tightened ever so slightly against her hip. Eleanor stiffened, attempting to pull away, but the moment she did, his arm locked around her, keeping her firmly in place. A low hum rumbled through his chest. "You're awake," he murmured. She swallowed hard. His grip did not loosen. Instead, he exhaled slowly, his voice low and thick with sleep. "You slept well." It was not a question. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." His lips curved slightly. "Good." His hold on her did not waver, and Eleanor quickly realized he had no intention of letting her go. She shifted slightly, her leg brushing against his beneath the sheets. The air between them changed instantly. Something unseen crackling like a slow-burning flame. She felt it, and so did he. His fingers slid from her hip to her waist, his thumb brushing over the fabric of her nightgown in a slow, teasing motion. "You're warm," he murmured. Eleanor felt her breath hitch. She had never heard his voice like this before. Soft, intimate, completely unguarded. She swallowed, trying to steady herself. "The fire." He mused, his fingers trailing slightly lower, barely touching, but enough to make her stomach tighten. Perhaps. A slow, dangerous smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Or perhaps, he continued, his breath ghosting against the side of her face, "It's because you like sleeping in my arms." Eleanor froze. Her entire body heated instantly. She tried to move back, but his grip tightened just enough to keep her where he wanted her. "Tell me," he murmured. "Do you?" She swallowed. His fingers brushed against the curve of her spine. Eleanor shivered. She wanted to argue. She wanted to deny it. But that would be a lie, because for the first time in her life, she had slept without fear. Her silence was answer enough. Alexander's smirk deepened slightly. "I thought so." And then he leaned closer. Eleanor's breath caught. He wasn't touching her. Not fully, but he didn't have to. His presence alone was too much. His gaze flickered to her lips. And for a single heart-stopping moment, she thought he was going to kiss her. Her pulse hammered against her ribs, her fingers curling into the sheets. But then he stopped. He tilted his head slightly, studying her with something dark and unreadable. And then, with infuriating ease, he exhaled and released her. "Get dressed," he murmured as he slid out of bed. "We have things to do today." Eleanor blinked, still frozen in place. The moment was gone, and he had done it on purpose. A slow, burning frustration built inside her as she watched him walk toward the wardrobe, effortlessly composed. He had teased her. He had known exactly what he was doing, and she had fallen right into his trap. Eleanor clenched her fists. Two could play that game. Eleanor spent the entire morning watching Alexander closely. She had never been one to play games, but after what he had done earlier, she refused to let him win. So she started testing him. It began with small things. Brushing her hand along his arm just slightly longer than necessary. Leaning a little closer whenever he spoke. At first, he seemed unaffected, but then she noticed the change. Whenever she touched him, his jaw tightened slightly. Whenever she leaned in, his fingers would twitch as if resisting the urge to pull her against him. And when she grazed her fingers over his hand during breakfast, his fork snapped in half. She barely hid her smile. Alexander set down the broken silverware, his dark eyes fixing on her with quiet calculation. "You're enjoying yourself," he murmured. Eleanor lifted her teacup. "Whatever do you mean?" His lips twitched, but instead of scolding her, instead of putting her back in her place, he did something worse. He leaned forward, so close that his lips nearly brushed the shell of her ear. Eleanor went completely still. "You're playing with fire, little wife," he whispered. She swallowed hard. Then, with every ounce of willpower she had, she turned her head, meeting his gaze without fear. "Perhaps I like the heat," she murmured. His expression shifted, just slightly, just enough to tell her she had won. And then, before he could recover, before he could strike back, she stood, brushing past him with a quiet, satisfied smirk. For the first time since she had met him, she had gotten the last word. That night, the game continued. Eleanor had expected Alexander to return to the guest room as he had the first few nights. But he didn't. Instead, when she climbed into bed, he did the same. She stared at him. "You're staying?" she asked softly. Alexander slid beneath the sheets, his movements slow, deliberate. "Where else would I go?" Her heart skipped. He reached for her then, pulling her against him as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She didn't resist. She didn't want to. For a long moment, they simply lay there, silent, steady. Then he moved, not roughly, not suddenly, but slowly, deliberately. His fingers brushed against her jaw, tipping her chin up. She exhaled softly, and then his lips met hers. The first kiss was not soft, it was not careful, it was possession, it was a claim. Alexander kissed her as if she had always belonged to him, as if he had been waiting for this moment, as if he had no intention of ever letting her go. Eleanor sank into him, her fingers curling into his shirt as he deepened the kiss, his hands sliding to her waist. Her body shuddered beneath his touch. And just when she thought he might stop, he murmured against her lips, his voice rough and full of promise, "You are mine, Eleanor." And she knew, without a doubt, he meant it.